welcome to Northern Nightmares. I'm your host Andrew, and this is the final part of our Pandemic Nightmare series. This week, we go back to the year 2020, when the world got thrown upside down. This is the COVID-19 pandemic. Before we go any further, though, I can't stress enough, if you have any PTSD from the pandemic, please skip this. Next week will be a fun palate cleanser. I don't want anyone remembering any ill moments from that time. Alright, if you're still listening, then let's continue onward. COVID really did a number on this world, mentally and economically. Now, we don't know 100% of COVID's origins. However, there are similarities to other outbreaks to which provides evidence for a good origin theory. During the pandemic, we all drove ourselves mad trying to find the answers to why things were happening. We didn't know then, and as of 2026, we really still don't know anything at all. There are a few theories that claim COVID wasn't naturally made, but we'll get to that later. I'm going to cover the major details about what the virus was, the impact it made, and then the top theories of where it came from. This pandemic really changed us on how we looked at life. It divided us at least into two groups. You either followed the rules and kept yourself and loved ones safe, or you went about your day ignoring the protocols, believing it was nothing but, insert quotation fingers, another flu. Regardless of where you stood, I think we all were afraid of what was happening. So let's wind the clock back about a few years to 2019 to 2020, when COVID wreaked havoc on the world. Let's look at the madness that it inflicted on us, and lastly, have a laugh. You deserve it after everything. So grab your N95 mask, lube up with hand sanitizer, and keep 6 feet away from others while listening to this episode. Isolation not required after listening. From the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, scientists, world governments, and other like-minded organizations were on a mission to discover the origins of the new virus. There is no definite answer as to where it came from. However, looking at evidence from similar outbreaks, it's thought the most logical answer is that it came from bats. More specifically, a bat-borne virus that in theory was transferred to other animals and then possibly to humans via consumption. Animals that could have carried the virus could have been pangolins. Think of an anteater with scales, civets, and raccoon dogs as well, both being nocturnal mammals. All three of these creatures can be found mostly in Asia, as well as the jungle regions of Africa. COVID-19 is the shortened version of SARS-CoV-2, which means Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2. Now, the first official cases of COVID showed up in Wuhan, China, and it had a few names before it received the official one. The first couple were the coronavirus and the Wuhan virus. Then WHO, which is the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland, labeled it 2019 nCoV, as their guidelines forbid viruses to be attached to locations, animals, or even people. As of February 2020, the International Committee on Taxonomy of Viruses decided to officially label it SARS-CoV-2. Now, to avoid confusion, sometimes WHO often just called it COVID-19 instead of its full name because it could confuse people with SARS-CoV-1. That is the official name of SARS outbreak that happened back in 2002 to 2004. And if you're wondering what the difference is, SARS, the first one, has a higher mortality rate, which varies on region but could be between 10 to 45% in deaths, whereas COVID depends on region and population, has a mortality rate of 0.25 and 3%. Now, the virus for us can be transmitted via respiratory droplets like from coughs or sneezes. All one has to do is to be within 6 feet of another. It's often thought that it could also be airborne with a little bit of wind. The virus could easily travel past the 6 feet. Symptoms could vary depending on which type of variant one contracted, from mild to fatal. The common symptoms were coughing, fever, loss of smell, and even taste. There was less common symptoms as well, like headaches, runny nose, sore throat, diarrhea, and even muscle pains. The fatal symptoms could have been high fevers, shortness of breath, multiple organ failure, circulatory failure, and even respiratory failure. There were the top 3 symptoms to cause death. There were some people that seemed immune to the virus. We called this being asymptomatic. However, they may look fine, but they could have the virus inside them and not even know it. Also, when no one gets sick, our body learns to fight it. Basically, our body would adapt to the virus, so that next time we would have a better chance of preventing it. In some cases, one could be reinfected again with COVID. COVID breaks down the door to your body, wrecks your home, and leaves like an asshole. Then once you have everything back to normal, the door is knocked down again, and COVID is like, "I'm back, bitch. Did you miss me?" To make matters worse, if you were sick, you had to isolate by 5 to 10 days. If your household had to isolate together, you were all stuck there together. If people had to isolate by themselves, and if you didn't have a hobby, you did after the pandemic, or you just talked to the voices in your head. Talk about cabin fever. In some cases, when people isolated together, domestic violence could happen. So you're sick as a dog, you can't leave the house, you're probably bored as fuck, and you're sick of looking at your family. How did we manage to get through it? It was one hell of a time, and I think I would have rather partied in hell over dealing with COVID. Let's turn our attention now at the impact that COVID had brought, what it was doing in the meantime, and what had happened afterwards. For one thing, when it was first discovered in Wuhan, China in 2019, it seemed like it was probably just another flu. However, doctors were paying attention. They had noticed that when one was infected, they had a mysterious pneumonia that wasn't normal. By the time December 2019 rolls in, China had officially notified WHO that an outbreak had begun and it was time to batten down the hatches. Going into 2020, people had the "it won't come here" mentality. However, cases started to pop up in other parts of Asia and other countries, such as Thailand, Japan, the Koreas, and slowly into North America. How the hell did it get overseas so fast? Well, that was due to air travel. Within the first months, airports were conducting temperature screenings. High fevers meant no travel for you, go home and isolate. The people of Asia were wearing masks more frequently now. However, us in the West thought it was just kind of dumb and we weren't going to get sick. Little known fact, China, for example, was known for mask wearing long before it became a social norm. But it wasn't for the sickness, but it was to deal with the terrible pollution. It was normal to wear one to avoid breathing in the smog that China produces from all the factories and warehouses. At the end of January, WHO declared COVID-19 was a public health emergency. Most people still assumed it wasn't going to affect them. However, the world was thinking it was a new H1N1 variant or just another SARS outbreak. But life continued as normal, for now. By February, the virus was becoming a growing concern. Countries like Italy and Iran were dealing with major breakouts. Remember cruise ships, the luxurious lifestyle, sailing on the seas, being pampered like you were one of the royal family? Yeah, those became floating petri dishes. You go from drinking mojitos by the pool, racing to the buffet to get the goods before the others, having orgies with other couples, to being locked into your room, sick as fuck, and probably puking over the side of the ship, and being told you can't leave because you're surrounded by other sick people. The Diamond cruise ship was one of the first stories to become a giant outbreak. There were 3,711 people on board. The world was starting to break down. Stockpiling on masks and sanitizer was becoming a quest. If you didn't get there fast enough, you were shit out of luck. If you did get there in time, you could end up going fisticuffs with another to get that last box. Nobody cared about the latest episode of their show. The news had become the top program. By March 11th, WHO officially declared COVID-19 a pandemic, and this is where shit hit the fan. Countries closed their borders. No one was allowed in or out unless you were considered an essential worker. That usually involves government workers, healthcare, truckers, farmers, etc. Schools were officially closed. Kids jumped for joy, but that lasted a whole 5 minutes until they had found out later on that school was going to happen through Zoom calls. Sports events canceled, non-essential workers laid off, non-essential businesses temporarily closed, even Disneyland closes. What did we do about Disneyland? They didn't even think about the children. I'm sure Mickey got tired of isolating with the others. I can only imagine what Goofy was like. And I'm sure a lot of you had to go home, be laid off, and wait to be called back to work. I was at least laid off as well till at least close to September. And there were some parts of my time I don't remember. Liquor and weed were my best friend. Many countries were issuing a stay-home order to all residents. Nova Scotia went viral during this time when our Premier Stephen McNeil said during a live news mandate, "Stay the blazes home." That was because some people didn't give a shit, continued going about life like normal, often complaining about getting told by authorities to go the fuck home. I mean, as I said earlier, we were all divided. We had no idea what the hell to do. However, I think the strangest thing to happen was around this time. People were freaking out. Panic buying was happening, and the top item was toilet paper. Yes, the good old shit tickets were a hot commodity. People would fight over them, rip them out of each other's hands, nearly killing each other for the glorious TP. Paper towels, cleaning supplies, and hand sanitizer was also popular. Had to keep that virus away somehow. Except there was such a shortage of sanitizer, companies were making quick batches just to pump out the demand. Some of them smelled like pure moonshine. Pasta, canned food, anything that was quick and easy to store for months was quickly gone. Grocery shelves were empty. Store lineups would last hours. Plexiglass shields would appear to keep workers safe from the virus. The world was going mad, and we believed this was finally the end. Was this really how we were going down? Well, we thought so. No one really knew what the world was doing. A lot of us was just paying attention to local news. Even news had no idea what was really happening because our governments were still trying to figure it out. By the time spring rolled in, lockdown life was starting to become normal. Classes were on Zoom. People worked from home. Amazon was the top store, and staying 6 feet apart was normal. To the rest of us, that couldn't work. I'm sure you did the same as me. You wake up every day and get drunk. I mean, I know it's not a healthy way of living, but what else could we have done? Throughout the world, everyone was staying inside. If you had to go out, you either got permission from your local authorities or selected members were allowed to leave at certain times of the day. If you were still abroad due to travel, people had a hell of a time trying to get home when things first started to fall apart. For example, my partner was stuck in South America because she couldn't cross the borders. When America closed its walls for good, she had to detour to Europe. Authorities there questioned her with guns, wondering why she traveled this far just to get to Canada. They had no idea the U.S. closed their air travel borders at the time. Thankfully, she got home safely and back to Halifax with friends. This was long before we met. We had some memorable viral moments, though, during the pandemic, like daily applause for healthcare workers, Zoom weddings, people showing off their homemade masks, which looked better than the N95s till we realized the homemade ones were not safe and the N95s were better for us. Even the Nintendo Switch had a record-breaking sales. Animal Crossing was a top game. People could make their own little island, a temporary escape from the horrors of the world. Friends could even meet online, play games, and even check out our little island creations. TikTok dances were exploding in popularity. It became one of the biggest apps at the time, and it never slowed down as TikTok is still just as popular today. However, by the summer, beaches, parks, and restaurants were starting to open up. Hallelujah! Yay! Time to escape our prison walls, enjoy some freedom. Yeah, that didn't last long because cases started to surge up again, and that meant time to go back inside. That was a little tease for everyone, and it was enough to push people. Society was becoming aggressive. Arguments would erupt over mask use, the lockdowns, and if there was a vaccine in the works. People were getting tired. We wanted to go back to work. We wanted to be free. We wanted to be away from our families and stop getting sick. We needed a break from the break. To help out people's needs, the government started handing out checks with large sums to cover expenses, grocery bills, and other essentials. Many small businesses and restaurants closed and their doors for good. The hope that things would get better was starting to go out like a candle. However, by the winter of 2020, pharmaceutical companies were announcing that vaccines were showing at least 95% effectiveness in human clinical trials. People were starting to look up again for the future. By December, vaccines were rolling out, and the first people were healthcare workers and the elderly. The light was starting to appear at the end of our dark tunnel. Into 2021, vaccines were rolling out in full force. Everyone was lining up to get shot. Things were looking good for us, but if you remember, we partied a little too soon. Different variants were starting to pop up. It was like life was trying to fight against the vaccines. Something wanted to keep us down. In the UK, they had the Alpha variant. South Africa had the Beta. Brazil had the Gamma, and so forth. And then the Delta wave appeared, and it was far more contagious than the last strains. Hospitals were starting to fill up again. Mask mandates were returning in full force. By late 2021, another new variant appeared, the Omicron strain. It was spreading like wildfire. Millions of people were infected within weeks. The good news, though, was that everyone's first shot, Omicron had a harder time to inflict any serious symptoms. Wait, did I just say first shot? I sure did, because not long after everyone got pricked, we had to double up with another to deal with future strains. And then we had to get a third, and even a fourth. By 2022, people started to learn to just live with COVID. It was becoming a social norm. Masks were becoming a permanent piece of clothing when we left. Things were starting to open up again, and people were heading back to work. By 2023, WHO had officially declared COVID-19 pandemic had officially come to an end. But what happened to COVID? Well, it's still out there. It's still infecting people. Now, not like it was in the beginning because of vaccines, but it still exists for us. But it's just another flu. Mask wearing still exists as of 2026, but most of us now have left that in the past. We want to just forget about that time and move on. However, that's not the end of our story just yet, because COVID is still heavily debated on where it came from and why it started. In the beginning, I said it came from animals, and that it was a new strain of SARS. But that's not what others believe. Grab your tinfoil hats, because we're going to look at the conspiracy theories now of the dreaded virus. The first theory on our list claims that COVID had been leaked from a laboratory somewhere in Wuhan. Supposedly, the coronavirus was being studied by examining bats to which carried the virus. However, this was never proven to be true. It's often confused with the claim that it was deliberately released, to which goes to our next theory, that it could have been designed as a bioweapon. This could be used for wars or even population control. However, again, no evidence proves that this was just another wild claim. If I were to believe that the claims that COVID was designed by us, the biggest theory that makes sense to me is that government planned the pandemic to stop overpopulation. It's said the secret governments planned the pandemic years before 2020 as well to stop the ever-growing population of the planet. With countries developing new areas to live, the land was starting to become scarce. With over 8 billion people on the planet, things are starting to run out. So what would happen if a major pandemic happened? Well, some would hope that it could wipe out a good chunk of the population to help the rising issues. However, after the pandemic, If we look at the death toll, there was only an estimated 36 million people that died because of COVID. Regardless if the death toll was millions or just one person, it's tragic and heartbreaking all the same. However, it wasn't enough to make a dent into the population. If that theory was true, it failed to achieve its goal. It's not like the story of the Avengers Infinity War where Thanos snapped his fingers and wiped out half the galaxy to deal with overpopulation. And I'm sure if a secret government planned this, they probably hoped for the same effect, since that movie came out in 2018. Now, I don't support the thought of planned killing. I'd rather everyone live long lives and pass away peacefully. But it is an interesting theory if it were true. We may never know the truth. Now, some little claims that help out with that theory are mass mandates were used for social control, vaccines were designed to amp up deaths since COVID failed to do so, and even while a wild claim that vaccines had secret microchips so governments could track everyone. However, plausible as these claims may be, with no evidence to support them, they just stay in the realm of theories and not fact. A lot of us can agree on the fact that 2020 was definitely the worst year in modern day, and it wasn't just COVID that made it that way. Oh yeah, I'm about to remind you of the other tragic shit we had to deal with. We had the Beirut explosion in Lebanon. This was caused because of 2,750 tons of ammonia nitrate exploded, killing at least 218 people and injuring at least 7,000 people. The United States and Australia were both dealing with fires. The US had wildfires and the Aussies had brush fires, both causing major damage. We had Hurricane Eta and Iota making devastating impact in Central America, mostly in the Honduras area. A few weeks ago, talked about the Nova Scotia mass shootings caused by Gabriel Wharton. This incident broke the province and was felt throughout the country. We also lost Kobe Bryant and his daughter Gianna, and several others in a terrible helicopter accident. Chadwick Boseman passed away due to colon cancer. He was a famous actor, most notably in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for playing King T'Challa, the Black Panther. Alex Trebek passed away, Eddie Van Halen passed away, and even Naya Riviera drowned while saving her son. And not to forget the tragic loss of George Floyd, which one could say was the final straw for the black community, as the Black Lives Movement rose up and fought against racism and police brutality against black people. It's like this. God asked one of his angels, "Hey, did you get that list I sent you for all the tragic stuff I want planned out for the next 10 years? The angel responds, 10 years? I thought you wanted that all in one. And this is what happens when you forget the zero. God forgot to proofread. After that year, I'm sure we all felt like the Ben Affleck meme, where he's outside, eyes closed, having a smoke, and you could just see he's tired. The COVID pandemic was something a lot of us will surely not forget anytime soon, even though we wish we could wipe it from our memories, because even today, a lot of us still blame 2020 for when the world went tits up, and currently dealing with the economical impact from it. And that is the end of our Pandemic Nightmare series. I hope you enjoyed learning about these pandemics, and I'm glad we dealt with COVID over the Black Plague era. Now, I will say, these weren't the only deadly viruses out there. I chose to focus on these three stories as they're kind of still talked about today. But however, we've had other epidemics in the past, but they weren't as big to cause a global shutdown. We had the H1N1 outbreak during the late 90s and early 2000s. There was a swine flu outbreak in 2009, and even the Ebola outbreaks in 2014, 2016, and now again in May 2026. There are thousands of viruses out there wreaking havoc on humanity, and one day I will do another series like this, covering others that you may remember and others you may not know about. For next week, though, we're going to have a good old-fashioned ghost story. I have a story about a mansion designed as a labyrinth to confuse the paranormal, but more on that later. Feel free to send me stories that you wish for me to cover at northernnightmares@outlook.com. Hit that subscribe button and share this podcast to others. It really helps with the growth of the show. This is your home for nightmarish tales throughout Canada and beyond. I'll see you next week. Sweet dreams, and remember, nightmares are closer than you think.